Judge finds teacher, then learns she's his son's favorite mentor. The clock above the chalkboard ticked loudly, its steady rhythm filling the empty classroom as Emily Harper finished erasing the remnants of her last lesson. The smell of chalk dust hung in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of coffee from the thermos sitting on her desk. Outside, the late autumn sun bathed the schoolyard in golden light, but Emily's focus was on the papers scattered before her. Just a few more, she muttered to herself, scanning her students' essays. She always stayed late on Fridays, ensuring her students' work was graded before the weekend. It was her way of honoring their effort, especially the kids who needed the extra push, like Ben Barrett, her brightest yet most troubled student. His essay about battling anxiety had brought tears to her eyes earlier. Her phone buzzed. Emily glanced at the screen, a sinking feeling in her chest. A notification from the local court reminded her of the parking violation hearing she'd nearly forgotten. The ticket was unjust, issued outside the very school where she spent countless unpaid hours tutoring. "Guess I can't delay this any longer," she sighed, shoving the papers into her bag. The courtroom was packed when she arrived. Municipal Court Judge Alan Barrett presided from his elevated bench, his stern demeanor as rigid as the rows of people waiting to be heard. Emily had seen his face before, in Ben's family photos at parent-teacher conferences. But she had never connected the dots. Today, he was just another figure of authority. Emily's turn came quickly. She rose from the wooden bench and approached the podium, clutching her meticulously prepared evidence, photographs, timestamps, and a letter from the school verifying her car's necessity during after-hours programs. Before she could present her case, Judge Barrett cut her off. "Ms. Harper, I see here you're disputing a simple parking violation," he began, his tone clipped. "Do you believe your time is more valuable than this court's?" Emily blinked, her breath catching. "Your Honor, if I may explain." "Save it," he snapped, leaning forward. "The law applies to everyone. I'm fining you $200 for wasting this court's time." The gavel struck the bench, silencing her. As the judge moved to the next case, Emily gathered her papers, her cheeks flushed with humiliation. She cast a glance back toward the bench. Judge Barrett was already focused elsewhere, but something about her presence seemed to linger in the room. Little did either of them know, the full weight of that moment, and their connection, was about to unravel. Emily Harper hurried out of the courtroom, her cheeks still burning from the humiliating encounter with Judge Barrett. The $200 fine was more than just a financial inconvenience, it was a symbolic blow to the dedication she had poured into her work. She had given countless hours to her students, sacrificing evenings and weekends to tutor those who struggled. Now, she felt dismissed and diminished by a man who didn't even grant her the chance to explain herself. Outside, the brisk autumn air stung her face, but Emily barely noticed as she made her way to her car. Her mind raced, replaying the judge's cold words. She felt powerless, but also oddly defiant. If only he knew the reality of the situation, she muttered under her breath. The following Monday, Emily was back in her classroom, surrounded by the familiar buzz of her students. Ben Barrett, her star pupil with a knack for literature but a troubled home life, arrived late as usual. His dark eyes avoided hers as he slipped into his seat. Emily made a mental note to talk with him after class. She had been working with Ben for months, encouraging his love of writing and helping him navigate the challenges of adolescence. When the final bell rang, Emily called Ben to her desk. "How's the essay coming along?" she asked with a gentle smile. He shrugged, shifting uncomfortably. "I've been busy." Emily leaned forward. "Ben, you're one of the most talented writers I've ever taught. Don't let life get in the way of what you're capable of." For a moment, his guarded expression softened. "Thanks, Ms. Harper. I'll try." As he turned to leave, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was weighing on him. Later that evening, as she reviewed his latest draft, her heart sank. His words were darker than usual, filled with frustration and longing for understanding. She suspected the pressure at home was worsening, a suspicion confirmed during the next parent-teacher conference when Judge Alan Barrett himself appeared. Emily recognized him instantly. He'd swapped his black robe for a tailored suit, but his presence was no less intimidating. Judge Barrett offered a terse handshake and took a seat across from her. Ben's mother was absent, as usual. So, Barrett began, his voice as formal as ever. "What seems to be the issue with my son?" Emily hesitated. She wanted to address Ben's potential, but also his struggles. Gathering her courage, she spoke. "Ben is incredibly gifted. His writing is mature and insightful, but I sense he's under significant stress. It's affecting his ability to focus and express himself." Judge Barrett's brows furrowed. "Stress," he echoed, his tone skeptical. "I provide a stable home. He has everything he needs." Emily's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not questioning your support, Your Honor. However, emotional stress can manifest in subtle ways. Ben might benefit from an open dialogue about his feelings." The judge's lips tightened. "I appreciate your input, Ms. Harper, but I'm fully capable of parenting my son. Perhaps the issue lies with his academic environment." The word stung, but Emily held her ground. "With respect, this is about ensuring Ben reaches his potential. He needs encouragement, not criticism." The tension in the room was palpable. Judge Barrett's eyes flicked to the essays pinned on the wall, each bearing Emily's encouraging comments. He seemed to falter for a moment, but the mask of authority returned quickly. "Thank you for your time," he said curtly, rising to leave. As he exited, Emily's resolve hardened. This wasn't just about a parking fine anymore. It was about a boy caught between worlds, a boy who needed both his father's support and the understanding of someone who saw his worth. And Judge Barrett, despite his title, needed to realize the true meaning of justice, both in and outside the courtroom. The days following the parent-teacher conference were tense, and Emily Harper couldn't shake the frustration bubbling within her. Judge Barrett's dismissive attitude during their meeting had left her feeling helpless, yet she remained focused on Ben. The young boy had grown quieter in class, his head often bent low over his desk. Emily knew that something was deeply wrong, but she had no idea how to bridge the widening gap between Ben and his father. The situation reached a boiling point during a creative writing assignment. Emily had asked her students to write about their happiest memories. While most children described family vacations or celebrations, Ben's essay stood out for its stark, haunting tone. He wrote about longing for a time when he didn't feel like a disappointment. The words were raw and heartbreaking, and as Emily read them, she knew she had to act. Later that evening, Emily reached out to the school counselor, Maria Lopez. The two sat in Emily's classroom, the essay spread between them. "This isn't just a bad day," Emily said, her voice heavy with concern. "He's carrying something he can't talk about." Maria nodded, her expression grave. "Have you spoken to his father about this?" Emily sighed. "I tried during the conference, but Judge Barrett, he's not the easiest person to reach. He's so closed off. He sees Ben's struggles as defiance." Maria tapped her pen against the desk thoughtfully. "I can arrange for Ben to meet with me, but this is a family issue, Emily. If his father doesn't understand what's going on, no amount of counseling is going to fix it." Emily's heart sank. She knew Maria was right, but convincing Judge Barrett to listen felt like an impossible task. Meanwhile, at home, Judge Barrett sat in his study, reviewing court briefs. His focus was broken by the sound of Ben slamming a door upstairs. The judge rubbed his temples, frustration building. He had always prided himself on discipline and structure, values he believed were essential for success. But with Ben, nothing seemed to work. The boy was slipping further away, and Barrett felt powerless to stop it. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock at his door. It was Ben, standing awkwardly with a notebook in his hand. "What is it?" Barrett asked, keeping his tone neutral. Ben hesitated, then held out the notebook. "Miss Harper said I should show you this," he mumbled. Barrett took the notebook and flipped through the pages. It was Ben's essay. As he read, his jaw tightened. The words cut deep, but not in the way Emily might have hoped. Instead of seeing his son's pain, Barrett felt accused. The essay seemed like a public indictment of his parenting. This is what you're writing in school? Barrett's voice rose with disbelief. You're making me out to be the bad guy? Ben's face crumpled. I'm not. He trailed off, his voice barely audible. If you spent half as much time fixing your attitude as you do complaining, maybe you wouldn't feel this way, Barrett snapped, tossing the notebook onto his desk. Now go to your room. Ben fled without another word. Upstairs, he buried his face in his pillow, his body shaking with silent sobs. For the first time, he wished he could be anywhere but home. The next day, Emily found Ben sitting alone during recess, his head down. She approached him cautiously, sitting beside him on the bench. Hey, Ben, she said softly. How are you doing? He shrugged, not looking up. I know you showed your essay to your dad, Emily ventured. That was brave. Ben's head snapped up, his eyes red-rimmed. It didn't matter, he said bitterly. He doesn't care. Emily's heart ached at his words. That's not true, Ben. He cares. He just doesn't always know how to show it. Why do you even care? Ben asked, his voice breaking. You can't fix this. Emily looked at him, her expression full of determination. You're right, Ben. I can't fix this. But I can promise you this, I'll always be here to listen, and I'll always believe in you. For the first time that day, Ben's shoulders relaxed slightly. He didn't say anything, but Emily saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her fighting. Later that evening, Emily sat at her kitchen table, drafting an email she had hesitated to write for days. She addressed it to Judge Barrett, detailing Ben's struggles and her concerns. She urged him to attend a meeting with Maria Lopez and herself, hoping to create a space where they could finally talk openly. As she hit send, Emily felt a mix of anxiety and resolve. She didn't know if Barrett would respond, but she knew she couldn't give up. Ben needed someone to fight for him, and she wasn't about to let him down. Judge Alan Barrett paced the length of his study, his jaw clenched tightly as he reread the email from Emily Harper. Her words lingered in his mind, each sentence an unflinching reflection of his son's struggles. The suggestion of meeting with a school counselor felt intrusive, almost insulting, but a deeper part of him recognized the truth in her message. Ben's growing distance and the pain he saw in his son's eyes were undeniable. Barrett had spent his career upholding justice, yet he was beginning to wonder if he'd failed to apply that same principle at home. Finally, after hours of deliberation, Barrett replied. He agreed to the meeting but insisted it take place at his home. He rationalized the decision as a matter of convenience, but it was clear he sought control over the situation. He didn't want to feel cornered. When Emily and Maria Lopez arrived at the Barrett residence later that week, the tension was palpable. Emily clutched a folder of Ben's essays and assignments, while Maria carried her notepad and a calm, professional demeanor. Barrett greeted them stiffly, his presence as imposing as ever, but there was a crack in his usual air of authority, a hesitation in his handshake, a flicker of uncertainty in his gaze. The three gathered in the expansive living room, its cold, formal decor a stark contrast to the purpose of their meeting. Ben lingered near the stairs, reluctant to join but unable to ignore the voices drifting through the house. Maria began gently. Judge Barrett, thank you for agreeing to meet with us. This isn't about assigning blame. It's about helping Ben thrive. Barrett nodded tersely but said nothing. Emily took a deep breath and laid the folder on the coffee table. These are some of Ben's recent writings, she said, her voice steady. They show his talent, but also his pain. I'm concerned that he's internalizing a lot of negative emotions, and it's impacting his ability to express himself fully. Barrett's eyes flicked to the folder but didn't reach for it. What do you expect me to do? He asked, his tone defensive. Maria leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. Ben needs to feel heard, Your Honor. He needs to know that his emotions aren't a sign of weakness and that he has your unconditional support. Discipline is important, but so is understanding. You think I don't understand my son? Barrett's voice rose slightly, his frustration bubbling to the surface. I've given him everything he needs. He has a stable home, access to a great education. That's not everything, Alan, Emily interrupted, her tone soft but insistent. For a moment, Barrett's eyes narrowed at her informal use of his first name, but he didn't stop her. Ben doesn't need more structure or discipline. He needs to know that his voice matters, that his feelings matter. Right now, he doesn't believe that. Barrett opened his mouth to argue, but the sound of footsteps stopped him. Ben appeared in the doorway, his face pale but determined. He looked from Emily to Maria and then to his father. They're right, Ben said, his voice quiet but steady. You don't listen, Dad. You just expect me to be perfect. And when I'm not, it's like I'm failing you. Barrett stared at his son, stunned into silence. Ben took a shaky breath and continued. I'm not perfect. I'll never be. But I'm trying, and it feels like it's never enough. I write about it because it's the only way I know how to say it. But even that doesn't seem to matter to you. The room fell silent, the weight of Ben's words hanging heavily in the air. Emily glanced at Barrett, who looked more human at that moment than she'd ever seen him. The judge's hands trembled slightly as he reached for the folder on the table. He opened it and began to read. Page after page, Barrett read his son's words. The essays revealed a young boy yearning for connection, grappling with self-doubt, and longing for his father's approval. By the time he reached the last page, Barrett's stern facade had cracked entirely. His face was pale, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I didn't know, he murmured, his voice barely audible. He looked up at Ben, his expression raw. I didn't know you felt this way. Ben's lip quivered, but he held his ground. You never asked. Barrett's shoulders sagged, and for the first time, he looked truly defeated. You're right, he admitted. I haven't been listening. I don't know how to fix this, Ben, but I want to try. Will you help me? Ben nodded slowly, his eyes wary but hopeful. Emily and Maria exchanged a glance, their relief palpable. The confrontation had been painful, but it was also a breakthrough. As the meeting concluded, Barrett walked Maria and Emily to the door. He turned to Emily, his voice tinged with genuine gratitude. Thank you, Ms. Harper. For not giving up on him. Or me. Emily smiled gently. This isn't just about Ben, Your Honor. It's about learning how to listen. For all of us. As she and Maria left, Barrett stood in the doorway, watching them go. Behind him, Ben hovered near the stairs, his posture less guarded. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a start, a chance for both father and son to rebuild the bridge between them. The days following the confrontation in Judge Barrett's home brought a quiet transformation. Ben returned to school with a lighter step, and while his reserved nature remained, there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. Emily Harper noticed the difference immediately, a slight smile when she greeted him in class, a willingness to share his thoughts during discussions, and most importantly, a steady improvement in his writing. His latest essay, A Reflection on Resilience, spoke of hope and the courage to rebuild. For Barrett, the process of change was more gradual. The night of the meeting had left him deeply introspective, and he found himself re-examining not only his relationship with Ben but also his approach to justice. He began spending more time at home, sharing meals with his son, and asking questions, real questions, about his thoughts and dreams. Ben's initial hesitance gradually gave way to trust, and their conversations grew longer and more candid. At work, Barrett's perspective shifted as well. During a routine court session, he caught himself before delivering a particularly harsh judgment. Instead, he paused and asked the defendant questions that revealed a story he might have otherwise overlooked. That moment stuck with him, a subtle but profound reminder of what Emily had said about listening. Emily, meanwhile, continued to advocate for her students with renewed vigor. The experience with Ben and his father reinforced her belief in the power of connection and the importance of her role. She worked with Maria Lopez to implement a new program at the school, an initiative encouraging parental engagement and emotional literacy workshops. The program's first event was a modest gathering in the school's cafeteria. Parents, students, and teachers came together to share their stories and build a stronger sense of community. Among the attendees were Barrett and Ben. For the first time, Barrett addressed the room not as a judge, but as a father. He spoke openly about the struggles he and Ben had faced and the lessons he'd learned. His vulnerability resonated, sparking a round of applause that made Ben smile with pride. As the event ended, Barrett approached Emily, gratitude clear in his expression. "You were right," he said simply. "I've spent my whole career interpreting the law, but I'm only just beginning to understand people. Thank you for teaching me how to listen." Emily smiled, her heart full. "It was Ben who taught us both. He's an incredible kid." Outside the school that evening, Ben walked beside his father, their steps synchronized. For the first time in years, they talked about everything and nothing, the stars overhead, favorite books, and the future. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and for them, it was enough. As Emily locked her classroom door and headed home, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The journey had been challenging, but it was a reminder of why she chose this path. Sometimes, small acts of understanding and persistence could create ripples far beyond what she imagined. And in her heart, she knew that this was only the beginning of many stories waiting to be rewritten. Months had passed since the pivotal meeting that changed the Barrett household. In that time, subtle but meaningful changes rippled through their lives. Judge Alan Barrett had become an advocate for reform within the judicial system, using his influence to promote initiatives aimed at empathy and understanding, both in the courtroom and beyond. He often reflected on the irony that it was his son, through the guidance of a compassionate teacher, who had taught him the most critical lesson of his life. Emily Harper's classroom was livelier than ever. Her efforts with Maria Lopez to introduce emotional literacy workshops had begun to bear fruit, creating a safe space where students and parents could express themselves. Ben, now a vocal participant in these sessions, had emerged as a quiet leader among his peers. His latest essay had been published in the school's newsletter, a poignant piece on finding strength in vulnerability. It was a proud moment for Emily, who had seen his transformation firsthand. One evening, as Emily packed her bag after another long day, she found a handwritten note tucked inside her desk. It was from Ben. "Ms. Harper, thank you for everything you've done for me. You didn't just help me write better, you helped me see that my voice matters. My dad and I are still figuring things out, but for the first time, I feel like we're talking. You made that happen. Thank you for believing in me. Ben." Emily smiled, tears stinging her eyes. It was moments like this that reminded her why she chose to teach, to be a beacon of hope, no matter how small, in the lives of her students. At the Barrett household, Ben and his father worked side by side in the garden one Saturday morning. Barrett had taken up the hobby to spend more time with his son, and while their rows of vegetables were far from perfect, the effort felt right. As they finished planting, Ben looked up at his father and said, "Thanks, Dad, for trying." Barrett placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his voice steady. "Thank you for not giving up on me." Across town, Emily Harper walked home through the soft glow of twilight, her heart light. She thought about the small changes that had unfolded and the larger impact they hinted at. It wasn't about perfection, it was about progress, about connection. As she turned the corner, she couldn't help but feel that the best stories were the ones where everyone learned to listen, to grow, and to believe in the power of second chances.